The days that followed were like a dream for Alex. He had come to Aloran for a mission, a simple peacekeeping effort. But now, with the twins, Nira and Kal, his world had turned upside down. He never expected to find two alien children stranded on a desolate planet, dependent on him for survival. Yet here they were, sitting by the campfire each night, waiting for his next move. Alex could see how much they depended on him. At first he thought it would be a quick and easy thing. Feed them. Keep them safe for a few days, and then send them on their way. But it wasn't that simple. Nira and Kal had never known a world like Earth. They didn't understand how to gather food, how to protect themselves, or even how to read the signs of danger in the wilderness. They were completely new to all of it. The twins had no family left, no one to guide them. Their people were scattered, hiding from the wars that had torn apart their home world. The twins had been living in fear for most of their lives. Now that they were with Alex, they clung to him like he was the only thing that could keep them alive. Each day, Alex taught them something new. He showed them how to use simple tools, how to gather water from the streams, and how to stay safe from the wild creatures that roamed Aloran's forests. He started with the basics: how to light a fire, how to catch small animals for food, and how to make a shelter out of the materials around them. Though they struggled at first, Nira and Kal were quick learners, absorbing everything Alex taught them with surprising speed. But they weren't like other survivors Alex had helped before. Most people came with at least some knowledge of how to live in harsh conditions, but the twins were different. They had no survival instincts to rely on. They didn't know how to read the sky, how to find food without the help of others, or how to protect themselves in battle. They were innocent in a way that was rare for soldiers like Alex, and it both warmed his heart and weighed on his mind. Nira, quieter of the two, followed him everywhere. Her dark, violet eyes never left him, as if she was constantly studying him, learning his every move. She would ask him questions in her soft, melodic voice, questions Alex had never really thought about before. "What is a family?" she asked one night as they sat around the fire. Alex looked at her, surprised. He had never really thought about family in terms of these twins, not like this. He had always viewed family as something distant, something he didn't need. But Nira's question made him pause. He had never stopped to think about what family truly meant. "A family is people who care about each other," Alex said slowly. "It's not just about blood, it's about being there for each other, looking out for each other. It's when you trust someone completely." Nira looked thoughtful. "Like you? You protect us, and we trust you." Alex smiled softly, his heart swelling with something he hadn't felt in a long time: warmth. "Yes," he said simply. "Exactly." Kal, on the other hand, was more energetic, always asking Alex about everything he did. When Alex started to teach them how to make a simple spear for hunting, Kal was the first to jump in, eager to try. But, like most things in their new life, he struggled. The spear slipped from his hand several times, and his aim was far from perfect. But Alex didn't give up on him. He patiently showed him again and again, teaching him how to hold it properly and how to focus. "You'll get it," Alex said after the 10th time Kal missed the target. "It just takes practice." Kal's eyes lit up with determination. "I won't give up. I will learn, I promise." And he did. Slowly but surely, the twins began to adapt to their new life. They learned how to hunt small animals, how to fish, and how to forage for food. Alex taught them to keep their senses sharp, to listen for signs of danger, and to stay close to the camp at night. It wasn't easy, and it took time, but they started to get better. In the evenings, after a long day of work, Alex would sit by the fire with them. They would eat together, share stories, and talk about things they never would have discussed at the beginning. They were becoming a family in their own strange way. A family made of 3 individuals from entirely different worlds, but united in their need for one another. One evening, as they sat together, the twins asked him a question that caught him off guard. "Alex," Nira said, her voice soft, "will you always be here?" Alex looked at her, unsure how to answer. He had never really thought about his future beyond the mission. He had always been focused on survival, on the next day, the next mission. But now, with the twins depending on him, He had to consider something bigger than himself. "I'll stay as long as you need me," he said slowly. "If you want me to," Call nodded. "We do," he said simply. "We want you to stay with us. We want you to be our family." The weight of their words settled on Alex's chest, heavier than he had expected. The bond between them had grown stronger than he could have imagined. They weren't just following him out of fear anymore. They were looking at him as something more. They were beginning to see him as the family they had lost. Alex didn't know how to respond. He wasn't sure what family meant in the context of an alien world. He had never considered himself capable of being a father figure, but here were two children who needed him, depended on him, and trusted him completely. It was overwhelming, to say the least. But it was also something he had never experienced before. He had always been the one to protect, but now he had become something more. He had become their anchor in a world full of chaos. Over the next few days, the bond between Alex and the twins only deepened. They spent more time together, learning from each other. The twins began to trust him in ways Alex hadn't anticipated. Nira would seek his advice when she was unsure, and Call would ask him for help when he couldn't figure out something. It was as if they had become his children, even though they weren't human. The more time Alex spent with them, the more he realized how much he had changed. His once cold, distant heart had softened. He no longer felt the same sense of loneliness he had before. The twins had become his purpose. Protecting them had become his reason for continuing on. One day, as they worked together to build a better shelter, Nira spoke again. "Alex," she said, her voice filled with seriousness, "we don't want to be alone anymore." Alex paused, looking at her with concern. He wasn't sure what she meant. "We want you to be our family," Nira continued. "We want to always be with you." Alex felt a lump form in his throat. This wasn't what he had expected when he first met them. But now, with the twins so dependent on him, he realized that they weren't just asking for food or safety. They were asking for something deeper, something more lasting, a bond, a connection, a family. "I'm not going anywhere," Alex said softly. "I promise you that." The twins smiled, their faces lighting up with relief. In that moment, Alex knew that his mission had changed. It wasn't just about peacekeeping or protecting a planet anymore. It was about these two alien children who had become his family, his responsibility, and his heart. And no matter what came next, he would stand by them, guiding them, protecting them, and showing them what it meant to have a family. The Galactic Confederation had seen many grand events, but none like the one planned for this evening. The vast space station known as Eldara Prime floated in the middle of the galaxy, a place where representatives from countless alien species gathered. Tonight was special. The galaxy's brightest minds and leaders had come together to celebrate the newly formed alliance between various races. From the proud Korax warriors to the ancient Xrath scientists, this was a moment of unity after centuries of conflict and misunderstanding. The banquet hall of Eldara Prime was enormous, with walls that shimmered like the surface of a calm ocean. Light floated in the air, soft and golden, casting an almost dreamlike glow. The tables were covered in fine fabrics, and delicacies from across the stars were laid out in a grand display. Every race had contributed something unique, a tradition of their people. But the humans, often seen as a primitive and young species, were asked to bring something, different something, special. The humans were not known for their advanced technology or long histories like the others. But they were known for one thing: food. Their cuisine was rich with history and emotion, a reflection of their unique connection to the world around them. The humans had brought one dish to the banquet, the famous steak of the sun, a recipe that had been passed down through generations. At the head of the table, the humans' representative was a man named Elias, a renowned chef. His hands, skilled from years of practice, had crafted the dish with care. The steak had been cooked to perfection, tender and golden, surrounded by colorful vegetables and an aromatic sauce. To humans, food was more than just fuel. It was an expression of their love, their culture, and their shared experiences. As the aliens seated themselves at the table, they eyed the food with curiosity. Many had never tasted human food before, and some even viewed it with disdain. The Zarath, an ancient species known for their cold intellect, considered human food nothing more than a trivial pursuit. The Orcs, with their mighty warrior culture, believed that only strength and power could win the galaxy's respect. They did not understand the concept of enjoying a meal. But tonight, these deeply rooted beliefs were about to be tested. Elias stood with a humble smile as he watched the guests take their seats. He knew that food could bridge divides, but he never imagined it would do so in the way he was about to witness. The first to taste the steak of the sun was Zillion, a high-ranking Zarath scientist. His long silver robes glided as he moved, his sharp eyes studying the dish before him. He had heard the human's meal was special, but he hadn't expected it to feel so ... alive. The moment he took a bite, his body tensed as a wave of sensations flooded through him. The rich, savory flavors were more than he could handle. It wasn't just the taste, it was something else, something deep. For the Zarath, who lived in a world of logic and calculation, emotions were a foreign concept. But as Zillion chewed, something inside him shifted. A feeling he had long suppressed began to stir within him, a sense of connection. He froze, his mind racing. He didn't know what was happening, but it felt as though the meal had unlocked something hidden deep within his consciousness. He could feel the memories of ancient ancestors, long forgotten, rise to the surface. The emotions to joy, sorrow, love, loss. It was overwhelming. His hands shook, and for a moment he felt like he might lose control. He quickly swallowed, trying to regain his composure. But the flavors lingered in his mouth, reminding him of something profound, something beyond logic. Was it possible that food could carry such power? Zillion glanced around the table, his mind still reeling. His eyes met those of a nearby Korax warrior, Zarnok, who had been watching him closely. Zarnok, with his muscular frame and stern face, did not show the same reaction. The Korax were known for their strength, but not for their sensitivity. However, as Zarnok took his own bite of the steak of the sun, a subtle change took place. Zarnok's brows furrowed as the flavors washed over him, and he, too, froze. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. He had been raised to value strength above all else, to believe that emotion and compassion were weaknesses. But as he chewed, something inside him changed. It was not a physical strength, but something deeper. He felt the weight of his past of battles fought and lives lost him for the first time. He questioned whether strength alone was enough. A warmth began to spread through his chest. It was unfamiliar, uncomfortable even, but in a way, it felt right. He could feel his own heart, something he had never paid attention to, beating in his chest. Not as a tool for survival, but as a symbol of life. He looked around the table again, and for the first time, he saw not enemies, but allies. Could it be that these humans, these fragile, weak creatures, had found something that he and his people had been missing for so long? Across the room, Kalter, a VRN energy being, watched the exchange with fascination. The VRN were not like the other species. They had no physical bodies in the traditional sense. Instead, they were composed of pure energy, their forms ever shifting and glowing with soft light. For them, food was unnecessary, as they sustained themselves through the absorption of energy from the stars. Yet, Kalter could feel something stir within them as the human's meal took effect. Kalter had never experienced physical sensations like the others, but the emotions those were universal. As they watched the reactions of the others, they felt a strange connection, something almost human. They had heard that human food carried a deeper meaning, a way to share emotion, but they had never truly understood it. Now, they were beginning to see it firsthand. The reactions around the table were undeniable. The meal had awakened something unthinkably deep, emotional response that no one had expected. The Zarath, who had always relied on logic and intellect, were now feeling emotions that they had long denied. The Korax, once focused only on strength and power, were questioning their beliefs. Even the VRN, who had no need for food, were feeling a strange pull towards something beyond their energy-based existence. As the evening progressed, more and more of the guests tried the meal. Each one had a different reaction, but all were affected. It was clear that something profound was happening, a shift in how the galaxy viewed humanity. The humans once seen as insignificant were now seen as the bearers of a gift of unity. Their food had sparked something deep within the hearts of even the most advanced alien races. Elias watched this transformation quietly, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. He had always known that food was powerful, but he had never imagined that a simple meal could bring about such change. But as the night wore on, he began to realize that this was only the beginning. The galaxy was changing. The divisions between species once so deeply ingrained were beginning to blur. And in the center of it all was a meal, cooked by a human chef, and shared among a room full of beings who had never considered such a thing before. The dinner was more than just a meal. It was a symbol of something greater, the beginning of a new era where food, culture, and empathy would come together to reshape the future of the galaxy. The reactions from the banquet had caused a ripple that could not be ignored. Across the galaxy, from the core worlds to the outer colonies, news of the human dish, the steak of the sun, spread quickly. It was not the meal itself that caused the stir, it was the profound effect it had on every being who tasted it. A simple human meal had awakened something deep within the hearts of powerful alien species. And now the galaxy was beginning to change. Zillion, the Zarath scientist who had first felt the surge of emotion from the meal, was still reeling from his experience. In the quiet of his study aboard the Zarath flagship, he sat alone, gazing out at the stars. His mind kept returning to the same question. What had happened when he took that first bite of the human food? Why had it stirred emotions, he thought. We're lost forever? He was one of the galaxy's brightest minds, trained to think with cold logic. Emotion was something he had long discarded as unnecessary, a distraction from the pursuit of knowledge. But that night at the banquet, he had felt something he could not explain, a deep connection to others. The memories of his ancestors had flooded his mind, and along with them came feelings of compassion and understanding. Zillion had always been proud of his species' intellectual achievements, their ability to rise above emotional weakness. Yet the human dish had revealed to him something he had never considered. Perhaps intellect alone was not enough. The experience of connection, of shared understanding had shaken him. And now he could not stop thinking about it. Back at the Zarath Council, Zillion attempted to explain the impact of the meal to his colleagues. But the other Zarath were skeptical. They had long prided themselves on their superior intellect and emotional control. The idea that a human meal could change the fundamental nature of their existence seemed ridiculous. But Zillion was persistent. He had to convince them that there was something more to this than just flavor and scent. The food is not just food, Zillion said during a council meeting. It carries something deeper, brings out something we have long suppressed, our emotions, our connection to others. We must study this further. There is power here. Power that could change the course of our future. But many of the Zarath, though intrigued, were still hesitant. To them, emotions were a weakness, not something to be embraced. Yet Zillion's words planted a seed of doubt. Was it possible that emotions long seen as irrelevant were more powerful than they had imagined? Far across the galaxy, the Orcs were facing their own set of challenges. They had always prided themselves on their strength, their power, their ability to dominate any situation. The Orcs warriors had never needed to rely on emotion. They were born to fight, to conquer, to win. But after the banquet, something had changed in the core of their being. Zarnok, the Orcs warrior who had taken his first bite of the human meal with skepticism, was struggling with a similar feeling. The warmth he had felt, the connection to others, was confusing. He had been raised to believe that only power mattered, that weakness was to be destroyed. But now, something inside him had shifted. Zarnok found himself thinking about the wars he had fought in, the countless lives he had taken. For the first time, he felt the weight of those actions. He could still hear the cries of his enemies in his mind, their voices haunting him. In a way, the human food had opened a door he had locked away in his heart, a door that led to remorse. Zarnok could not forget the taste of the steak of the sun. It had not just filled him physically. It had filled a deep, empty space inside him, a space he had never acknowledged before. He was no longer sure what he believed. Was strength really the only thing that mattered? Or was there something more, something he had overlooked his entire life? As days passed, more Orcs warriors began to experience similar shifts in their thinking. They, too, had tasted the human meal, and like Zarnok, they had felt something inside them change. The idea of compassion, something they had always seen as a weakness, was now being reconsidered. What if there was more to power than brute force? What if the true strength of a warrior was not just in fighting, but in understanding and protecting others? These thoughts were unsettling for the Orcs, who had always prided themselves on their single-minded pursuit of dominance. But slowly, their worldview began to shift. They were not the only ones. Meanwhile, on the VR homeworld, VR energy being named Kalter was contemplating the strange events unfolding in the galaxy. The VR had no physical bodies like the other species. They were beings of light and energy, able to exist without food or physical needs. Yet, as they observed the reactions of the other races, something inside them began to stir. Kalter had never experienced hunger or thirst. They had no need for the physical sustenance that other beings relied on. But as they watched the Zroth and Korax react to the human meal, Kalter began to feel an odd sensation. It was not hunger, but something like it, a longing for connection. The Viaran were ancient beings. Long removed from the struggles of other species, they had transcended the need for physical forms, choosing instead to exist as pure energy. And yet, the human food had sparked something in Kalter, a curiosity about the beings who still needed food, who still felt emotions. For the first time in millennia, Kalter questioned their own existence. Could their desire for transcendence be misplaced? Was there something more to life than eternal energy? Were the humans right? Was their value in the experience of connection? As news of the human dish spread across the galaxy, the ripple effects became undeniable. Species who had long been divided by war and suspicion were now questioning their beliefs. The cold logic of the Zroth, the fierce strength of the Korax, the detachment of the Viaranal were being challenged by the simplicity and power of the human meal. It was not just food. It was something Merit was a key to understanding the shared humanity that connected all beings. Regardless of their origins, some species were quick to embrace the change. The Ither, a species known for their artistic expressions, immediately began experimenting with human cooking techniques. Eager to explore the emotions that could be conveyed through food, the Grill, a peaceful species from the outer colonies, sent a delegation to Earth to learn about human culture and share in the experience of eating together, but not all were ready to accept this shift. The Vornari, a militant species with a deep belief in the purity of tradition, saw the human influence as a threat. The Vornari had always relied on strict hierarchy and discipline. They viewed the emotional awakening caused by human food as a weakness, distraction from their goals. The Vornari leadership began to organize against the growing influence of humanity. They began to sabotage human trade routes, targeting ships carrying food and supplies. The Vornari believed that if they could stop the spread of human culture, they could preserve their way of life. But their efforts were not going unnoticed. The Zerath, who had been the first to feel the emotional power of the human meal, found themselves in a difficult position. They were torn between their long-standing tradition of logic and the newfound emotions that had been awakened in them. The Zroth knew they had to make a choice, continue with the old ways, or embrace the new path that had been revealed to them. As more and more species felt the impact of the human food, the galaxy found itself at a crossroads. The old order, built on power and dominance, was being replaced by something new, a desire for understanding, compassion, and unity. And at the heart of it all was a simple meal that had sparked something unthinkable in the hearts of the galaxy's most powerful species. The ripples caused by the human meal had grown into waves. Across the galaxy, species once divided by old grudges, vast distances, and different ways of thinking were now questioning their beliefs. The stake of the sun had done what? Centuries of diplomacy, war, and negotiation could not. It had opened hearts and minds. But not everyone was happy with the changes. In the Zerath council chambers, Zillion sat with a troubled look on his face. It had been weeks since the banquet, and he still felt the weight of what had happened. His people, the Zarath, had always prided themselves on their intellectual superiority. They had spent centuries exploring the stars, unraveling the secrets of the universe with pure logic and reason. But now, after tasting the human food, emotions that had long been buried were bubbling to the surface. Feelings of connection, empathy, and compassion were unsettling to them. It was as if something fundamental about their nature had been challenged. Zillion had hoped his people would embrace these new emotions. After all, he believed that the future of the galaxy rested on understanding one another. But there were still many Zarath who resisted. They saw emotions as a weakness that could cloud their judgment. They wanted to remain detached, free from the distractions of feeling. In the council meeting, Zillion stood to address the group. The room was filled with Zarath leaders, all of them quietly observing the debate. Some of them were deeply disturbed by what had happened at the banquet. Others, like Zillion, could not ignore the possibilities that had been revealed. "We must consider the future," Zillion said, his voice calm but firm. "What we felt, what the humans have shown us, is not a weakness. It is a path forward. The emotional connections we now feel can help us build alliances, create understanding, and forge peace across the galaxy." His words were met with silence. Several of the Zarath leaders exchanged looks of discomfort. Zarath, named Veron, known for his cold logic and dispassionate reasoning, spoke up. "Zillion," Veron said, his voice sharp, "what you speak of is an illusion. Emotions cloud judgment. They lead to chaos. We are a species that thrives on logic. If we give in to these uncontrolled feelings, we will lose our way. Our civilization will fall into disorder." "But Veron," Zillion argued, "we are already in disorder. The galaxy is divided. The Corax still fight wars over ancient grudges, the Vieran live in isolation, and the Vornair believe in superiority over others. What we need is unity, not more war and separation." Veron shook his head. "Unity through emotion is fragile. It can be manipulated. Logic is what keeps us strong." Zillion's heart sank. It was clear that many of his people were still unwilling to change. They feared the very emotions that had been awakened in them. But Zillion knew that he could not turn back. He had tasted the human meal, and he had felt the shift within himself. He could no longer deny the importance of connection. Meanwhile, on the Corax homeworld, the situation was just as tense. The Corax had long believed that only strength mattered. They had built their empire through war, conquering worlds and imposing their will on weaker species. But the human meal had ignited something unexpected in their warriors. Zarnak, the Corax warrior who had first tasted the steak of the sun, was once again sitting in his chambers, reflecting on what had happened. He had always believed that strength was the ultimate power. But now he found himself questioning everything he had been taught. The meal had stirred something within him, feeling that strength alone was not enough. There was something more, something he could not yet fully understand. Zarnak stood up and walked to the window of his high tower, looking out over the sprawling Corax city. The sounds of battle drills and the sight of armored warriors practicing filled the air. These were his people, strong, fierce, and relentless. But for the first time, Zarnak wondered if there was another way. Could there be power in understanding? Could compassion be as strong as brute force? His thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Corin, a fellow Corax warrior. Also tasted the human meal at the banquet, and like Zarnak, he had felt the same unsettling shift. "I've been thinking," Corin said, his voice hesitant. "Maybe we were wrong all these years. We've spent so much time training for battle, for winning, that we've forgotten about the others, about the ones we conquer. Maybe the humans are right. Maybe there's power in protecting, in understanding their pain." Zarnak nodded slowly. "I've been thinking the same thing. We've always believed that power is something to take, but perhaps true power lies in what we give. We are strong, yes, but perhaps we can be stronger together, not just as warriors, but as allies." Corin looked at Zarnak, a small smile creeping onto his face. "We will never be the same again, will we?" "No," Zarnak said softly, "we will not." The realization that had begun in Zarnak's heart was starting to spread among the Corax. The meal had sparked something deep within them, a a sense of shared responsibility. They were beginning to see that true strength was not just about dominating others, but about protecting and caring for those who could not protect themselves. It was the beginning of a new way of thinking for the Orcs, but the path ahead would not be easy. They had to convince their leaders and warriors that this change was worth embracing. Across the galaxy, the ripple of change was spreading. The Vieran, beings of pure energy, had been watching the effects of the human food on the other species with great interest. Kalter, one of the Vieran's most respected elders, was particularly fascinated by the transformation taking place. The Vieran had never needed food. They had transcended the physical limitations of other species, living on pure energy. But as they observed the emotions that had been unlocked by the human meal, Kaltor began to question their own existence. For millennia, the Vieran had focused on transcendence, seeking to escape the limitations of the physical world. But now, Kaltor wondered if there was something even greater than transcendence. Perhaps there was a deeper connection to the universe that could be found not through isolation but through unity with others. "We are energy," Kaltor said, speaking to the Council of Elders. "We have lived for eons, free from the needs of the physical world, but we have also been alone. The others, the Zrath, the Korax, the humans, they are connected to each other through emotions. We have been blind to this. But perhaps this is the next step for us. Perhaps we, too, must learn to connect." The Vieran elders were silent. For the first time, the idea of connection, not through energy, but through emotions, was being considered. It was a radical thought. The Vieran had long prided themselves on their independence and transcendence. But as they listened to Kaltor, they began to understand. Could it be that the humans, with their simple meals and simple emotions, had discovered a truth that the Vieran had missed? As the days passed, the question on everyone's mind became clear. What was the true nature of strength? Was it power alone? Or was it something deeper, something that united rather than divided? The galaxy had always been a place of war and conquest, but now, for the first time, the possibility of peace seemed within reach. The change that had been sparked by the human meal was not just a passing curiosity, it was a movement. It's a movement that would reshape the future of the galaxy. The Zrath, the Korax, the Vieran, and many others had begun to see the world in a new light. The question of whether to embrace emotion, to embrace connection, was no longer just philosophical. It was a question of survival. The future of the galaxy was now tied to the choice each species made. Would they embrace the power of unity, or would they cling to the old ways? At the heart of this transformation stood the humans, small, often overlooked, but now seen as the harbingers of change. Through a simple meal, they had shown the galaxy a new way of thinking, a way that, despite the odds, might just be powerful enough to change everything. Across the galaxy, the changes set in motion by the human meal were growing. The Zrath, the Korax, and the Vieran, once isolated in their ways, were now beginning to question everything they had ever known. The simple meal of steak of the sun had ignited something within them that could not be ignored. Emotions were rising to the surface, and with them, new possibilities for unity. Yet not every species was pleased with this change. Among the stars, the Vornari saw the spreading influence of human ideas as a dangerous threat to their way of life. The Vornari had built their empire on the belief that only the strong should rule, that their traditions of dominance and power were the only path to greatness. They viewed the changes in the other species with increasing alarm. The emotional awakening caused by the human food was seen as a weakening of their well-established order, and the Vornari, fiercely protective of their traditions, were determined to stop this shift from taking root. Nirash, the high commander of the Vornari forces, stood before the council of his people, his gaze sharp and unwavering. The room was filled with tension as the Vornar leaders exchanged nervous glances. Nirosh's reputation as a ruthless and strategic thinker was well known throughout the galaxy. But today, he was not speaking about war tactics or battle formations. He was speaking about the human threat. "The humans and their food are infecting the minds of our allies," Nirash began, his voice cold. "The Zrath, the Korax, even the Vieran, all of them, have fallen under the influence of this weakness. They are beginning to embrace compassion, unity, and emotion. This will weaken them. We cannot allow this to spread." His words were met with murmurs of agreement from the more traditional Vornari. The Vornari had always believed in pure strength, in survival of the fittest. Emotion to them was a distraction, a softening of the will. It made people weak, and they could not allow weakness to spread among the galaxy's most powerful species. Nirash paced slowly, his sharp claws clicking on the stone floor. "We must act. We cannot let these alien emotions take hold. We must make sure that the galaxy remains under the control of those who are strong. The humans and their sentimental influence will destroy the order we've worked so hard to build." The council nodded in agreement. Narush's plan was clear. They would launch a series of covert attacks on human food supply lines. They would target human colonies, destroying their crops and food shipments. The idea was to disrupt the spreading influence of human culture, to prevent the emotional awakening from gaining further ground. But Nirash knew that the stakes were higher than just food. The emotional awakening had already begun to change the balance of power in the galaxy. If the Vornari didn't act swiftly, they risked losing control of the very thing they had spent centuries building, their dominance. And Nirash, ever the strategist, was not willing to let that happen. On the other side of the galaxy, Zillion of the Zarath was meeting with his closest colleagues. The Zarath had begun to embrace the changes that had been sparked by the human meal. Some of them, like Zillion, had come to believe that unity through emotional connection was the future. But others remained wary, clinging to their old ways of logic and reason. "I understand your concerns," Zillion said, speaking to the group, "but we cannot ignore what has happened. We have experienced something extraordinary. We have felt emotions that were once buried within us. These feelings have the power to unite the galaxy. We cannot allow fear to stand in the way of progress." One of the Zarath leaders, Veron, spoke up, his voice filled with skepticism. "And what of the Vornari? What of their refusal to embrace this change? If we show weakness, they will not hesitate to strike. They will see us as unfit to lead." Zillion paused. He knew that the Zarath were at a crossroads. The Vornari had always been a dangerous opponent, and their influence was strong. But the Zarath had changed, and they could not deny the shift that had occurred within them. They had learned that the path to true power was not just in logic, but in understanding. "We are not showing weakness," Zillion replied firmly. "We are embracing strength and unity. If the Vornari choose to fight against us, they will find that we are no longer just an intellectual force. We are now united in a way they cannot comprehend, and that is a strength in itself." Meanwhile, the Koraks were also beginning to change. The warriors, who had once believed that strength alone would see them through the galaxy's struggles, were now questioning their beliefs. The stake of the sun had ignited a spark of compassion within them, and many Koraks found themselves thinking more deeply about their actions. Zarnak, the Koraks warrior who had felt the power of the human meal, was leading a small group of Koraks warriors on a mission to prevent conflict with other species. The old ways of war and conquest were not enough anymore. Zarnak believed that the Koraks had the power to be more than just destroyers. "We must change," Zarnak said, his voice quiet but firm. "We cannot continue to follow the same path. Strength is not just about fighting. Strength is about protecting others, standing together as allies." His comrades listened, their faces serious. They had spent their lives in battle, and many of them struggled with the idea of peace. But the change that had begun within Zarnak was beginning to spread. Slowly but surely, the Koraks were starting to think differently. But not all Koraks shared this vision. There were those among them who still believed in the old ways, who saw the growing influence of human compassion as a weakness. They argued that the galaxy could not afford such softness. Strength, they insisted, was the only path forward. Zarnak knew that this divide within the Koraks could lead to conflict. He also knew that the Vornari would seize upon this division, using it as an opportunity to turn the Koraks back to their old ways. It was a dangerous game that was being played. As the weeks passed, the tension across the galaxy grew. The Vornari had launched their attacks on human food shipments, and the damage was beginning to show. The human colonies were suffering, and the once united alliance of species was starting to fracture. The Zarath, The Orcs, and even the Viewership, were now facing a difficult decision. Would they continue to embrace the new path of unity? Or would they succumb to the pressure from the Vornari and other traditionalist factions? Kelter, the Viewership elder, sat alone in the quiet chambers of their energy hall, meditating. The Viewership had always been beings of pure energy, unaffected by the physical world. But now, Kelter could feel something deep within. The question of connection had become more than an intellectual pursuit. It had become a matter of survival. The Viewership could no longer stand apart from the struggles of the galaxy. The decision was clear. They had to choose whether to stand with the others or isolate themselves. Once again, the Vornari were pushing back against the emotional awakening, believing it to be a threat to their power. But Kelter saw it differently. The galaxy's future was not in war or conquest. It was in understanding. It was in connection, and yet the Vornari were growing stronger. And the tension between the old and new ways was only deepening. Would the Zarath, the Orcs, and the Viewership be able to hold on to the unity they had started to build? Or would they be swept away by the storm of fear and resistance that the Vornari had unleashed? The galaxy was on the edge of something new, something powerful. But there were forces strong. Ancient forces that were determined to stop it. The battle for the future of the galaxy had only just begun.